come closer, sir?
Mr. President!
They can't hear you.
What? Mr. President, how can you put term limits on the Supreme Court when you served 36 years in the Senate?
Well, he remembered to salute the Marine that time. Monica Paige, you heard her question. President Biden, you heard him. You also saw him ignore her question. President Biden has stepped down from running this election cycle, but this week he is getting back out there doing more public events. First at the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of signing the Civil Rights Act, while also unveiling reform for the Supreme Court. This reform would include term limits as well as full disclosure of all gifts that each judge receives. Sounds all right. It is interesting that Biden's ideas of reform, as he is about to end his political career, are clashing with his own record. This is a man who's been in office for almost 50 plus years. He's received gifts aplenty, undisclosed. And if it's not to him directly, it's to his family members. So how does he intend to pass this reform? And will this take place in his final few months of office? Joining us now to answer some of these questions is White House correspondent for One American News, Monica Paige. Monica, I guess you're becoming somewhat of an expert in lip reading.
Yeah, it appears that way, that's for sure. I mean, he was standing way too far from any of us to really understand what he said. It wasn't until just moments after he finally boarded Marine One that we actually got a readout of what he said. He said that he's still working to reform the Supreme Court and that it's still long overdue that these changes happen. Like you just mentioned, the three major changes that President Biden is trying to make on the Supreme Court, it's not going to stick most likely. I spoke to the senior legal correspondent at the Federalist, Margot Cleveland, and she said these are just all talking points by the Biden administration and that any actual reforms or changes to the Supreme Court won't really pass through Congress or the House or the Senate. Nothing will really pass through. This is just all for show. This is all just a talking point, and this is just something that he wants to appease Democrats with, essentially.
Yeah, no, it certainly is ironic to consider Biden's own career in the Senate. He was on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and for years, decades, he never pushed for any such reforms. Going on the international front, we've had breaking news about the Israeli offensive going into Beirut, attacking Hezbollah leaders. Talk to us about how the Biden White House has been prepping, I guess, for this. I know that they haven't been left in the dark on this move. How has the Biden White House been handling this situation?
Right. This is certainly some breaking news coming out of the Middle East here. These latest strikes are in retaliation for the Hezbollah strikes that saw 12 Israeli children and other civilians killed recently. So this is essentially retaliation from the Israelis. And this is something that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been making clear for quite some time, that he does plan to finish the job, and that he said this time and time again, that he will do whatever it takes to get the remaining hostages out and protect Israeli lives. Of course, the Biden administration has made itself clear that it does stand in Israel's job to do what it has to do, but it's also been kind of walking this fine line between protecting Palestinian lives and also Israeli lives as well. So the Biden administration, although it seems to be making itself clear over months since this war broke out on October 7th, it does seem to kind of be trying to trek over to the other side as well, trying to say that Israel should not be harming any civilians. And Israel has also been saying that, you know, it's been making every effort to not kill civilians. But of course, we know that these terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, they use civilians as human shields. So whenever Israel does try to protect itself and fire back, you know, essentially these terrorist groups are putting its own civilians into harm's way.
And it's certainly putting the Biden National Security Council in a tough spot, because they've not been expressing a lot of actual movement in support of Israel. There's a lot of lip service, kind of like Joe Biden yelling through the helicopter, but not a lot of actual action when it comes to support, at least from the outside. I know that when Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the White House, he had somewhat of an awkward reception. Vice President Harris did not meet him in public, did not want to be taking pictures with him. You had Joe Biden meet with him. I know that you also had an off-the-record meeting with Netanyahu and his team. What can you share with us about that meeting?
Right. Well, of course, the Prime Minister's entire cabinet or his spokespeople, from the ones that I've spoken to, have made the message clear that, of course, we do share a common goal, the United States and Israel, and we also share a common enemy. So in trying to differentiate the meetings between President Trump and President Biden, the Prime Minister seemingly has previously and obviously mentioned before that, we do share a common goal and won't get into specifics of specific meetings between the two leaders. But of course, behind closed doors, it was a very tense meeting with the Prime Minister. I did have the pleasure of seeing him face to face, and it was very interesting as well. Just basically, reiterating what he said in public. He also mentioned to us as well. But when you think about everything that's been going on right now, Israel is fighting multiple wars. Of course, you have Iran and its axis of evil. You've got the Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. But you also have this war on the media as well. I mean, you've got all this disinformation coming out from the left, or, even when it comes to our own department, seemingly, because our own Biden administration, our own security advisors won't really give us a direct answer as to what is exactly going on. So when we leave these press briefings at the White House, we're left with more questions than answers as to what's happening abroad. Where are our dollars going? What's happening with the aid abroad as well? Seemingly blaming the Israeli idea for blocking the aid to its own civilians. But in reality, I mean, you're seeing these terror groups taking the aid for themselves. So, there's this mixed messaging coming out of the White House. And of course, Israel always, clarifying these statements between his spokespeople and from the Prime Minister himself. But, I was asking him about the Prime Minister about just how you're going to fight this misinformation, this disinformation coming out of the war, So this is something that Israel is really caught up with, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult for Israel to kind of clear its name and bring the truth to people about what's happening. And that's why I'm pretty sure that Israel is very happy for platforms like X to share what's really happening, to share the information and the footage as well as to what exactly has been happening, especially as we're seeing this latest breaking news coming out of Lebanon.
No, that's so true. And the administration, the current White House, is a famously anti-Israel group. They have been reaching for that pro-Palestinian wing of their Democratic Party, and in doing that, they're alienating huge swaths of our allies. And on another side, I'm interested to hear what you have heard on the ground at the White House about the reaction to the elections in Venezuela. I know that that's been a huge point of contention. People are definitely questioning that election. Do you have any word about whether the White House plans to impose additional sanctions on Venezuela, on Maduro's regime at this point?
At this point, it seems like the White House is kind of just waiting to see what comes out of Venezuela. I know that today President Biden did hold a phone call with Brazil's Lula da Silva. I'm sure that might have to do with what's happening in Venezuela as well. I'm sure that'll be among the talks of what's happening. I know that when it comes to Venezuela, the Biden administration has loosened its sanctions, especially when it comes to our oil. Now, apparently, we're drilling in Venezuela. So we'll see what comes out of the White House as far as this latest election. But I don't think the Venezuelans are too happy about what's been happening. And, it's only a matter of time till we find out the truth of everything, really, that's coming out overseas. And hopefully we don't see anything like that in our own country.
Well, Monica, I do hope you actually get a question before Joe Biden leaves office finally. We look forward to hearing and seeing your coverage of the White House over there. Thank you for the update.
Thanks, Chanel.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.